funkar. Hör ni mig? Ja. Jag tänkte snabbt bara introducera mig själv. Jag heter Ida och jag kommer från Foundy. Och det är vi som har designat de här taggarna som man hittar vid ingången. Och tips är att ta en sån tagg. Det finns rätt mycket intressant man kan göra med dem. Först och främst så kan man, maybe I should do this in English actually. So these are Foundy tags. They're a really smart solution when it comes to lost and found. So we're a digital lost and found solution. And in the tags, where you have both the information about hacks, you also have a Foundy tag. You can register this in our app and then register a product of yours. So if you lose it, you can find it again. It's really smart. So if you're interested, we have a bowl of products. Among them, we have our Foundy stickers as well, which you can place on your products, such as your computer, phone, earphones. The options are endless, up to your own imagination. So once you register them in our app, if you lose them, the person who finds them can contact you anonymously in the app, and you can get your item back. So that's how Foundy works. And during H22, we're giving away our products and our subscription for free for all users for eternity or lifetime. So I would suggest to grab as many as you can, register your items, and make sure you never lose an item again. So that's Foundy. If you have any questions, please go to our Instagram or our website, www.foundyapp.com. And if you have any more questions, I will be circling the area. Thank you so much. No, you can use it everywhere, anywhere. It works in every country. Yeah. So grab them since it's app, so it's not location based. Foundy? Foundy. Foundy.
Oh, nice.
You have it.
Oh, it's on the back of your image, that one in our app.
That is awesome. Yeah. Okay.
I'm ready.
Okay. All right. Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. Hope you've had great lunches. Thank you for making the time and joining us. I am Wang Jones, and I lead our work around inclusive design at IKEA. So we are here to share a little bit about what we are doing. And starting with, I want to emphasize around why inclusion is important. Now, I've been in this field for almost 20 years, and it's often seen as a soft and fluffy thing, something that's really nice to have, but not necessarily critical to have. And I do want to emphasize that really inclusion is something that is a basic human need for every individual. And why is that? It really goes back to the roots of humanity. We really developed our abilities to connect with each other, our emotions and complexity of our emotions that's helped us to really thrive as a species. And when we were hunter-gatherers, we really created these clans where we supported each other and had that kind of intimacy, and that's why we've done so well. And so in the modern world, we also see this challenge where our technology brings us together, but yet in some ways it really kind of pulls us apart as well. So we really have to address some of these things with the technology that we are creating. But the reality is also we have to recognize in the research that we see is that inclusion, or rather exclusion, when people are so lonely, they actually experience physical pain. And what we see is that the parts of the brain that are activated in the feeling of exclusion are the same as those activated in physical pain. And in fact, there are health consequences, both mentally and psychologically, as well as physical consequences of exclusion, such that people who are chronically lonely can be 45% more likely to die early. And when we look at children, super young children who have been orphaned, especially at infant and baby ages, there's a concept called failure to thrive. When they get food, they get shelter, but not the kind of love they need, they really simply cannot live and actually just die. So there are real consequences to humans. And I want to also put it out there, if you imagine your life without anybody who you can really confide in, who you can really connect with emotionally and intimately, what would your life be like? Right? And that's why I would suspect it would just not be as enriching and in many ways very detrimental to each one of us. So that is why inclusion is so important. And also, the challenge is that we keep getting the messages that we need to be logical and that emotions, don't be emotional, especially in the workplace. And we have to acknowledge that the only people who operate only on logic without emotions are psychopaths. And we do not want to strive to be that. So, let's talk a little bit then about the form and function and social aspects of design and how that influences our experience. Now, the first picture in terms of, this is an older slide, but that's okay. So we're talking about the form and function and the architectural piece. Now, first one there, I snapped this picture a few weeks ago in downtown Amsterdam, right? The railing here really tells you, like, do not sit here. I do not want you here. This is not an inviting space. Now, the second one in regards to the experience, right? Design can really create experiences for us. And here, now, I've been living in the EU for about 5 years now in 2 different countries. One of the things that I've noticed is that almost everything has cobblestone. And that, of course, creates mobility problems if we're talking about people in wheelchairs or crutches. But really, I have very flat feet. Just walking around cobblestone for a couple of hours is very painful. So think about how that impacts people's lives, right? And we all age. I cannot imagine that's a very comfortable situation to have on a continual basis if we don't create other solutions. And here, again, I found this in the Netherlands on the tram. What I loved was that it displayed which stations are accessible for people who have mobility issues. And imagine how helpful that is for somebody's day-to-day, especially if they don't live there, right? So the experiences that we can create really matter. And from a social perspective, the way that we design creates the opportunity for each one of us to interact, for us to create a society that we want. Now here I'm highlighting the idea of redlining. It's most notorious in the US, but it's been done all over the world, where we essentially design neighborhoods that tend to cater to particular populations and divide particular populations, especially if we're talking about socioeconomic status. In the US, this has historically been used to really divide and segregate on the basis of race, and we still see how huge of a gap when it comes to wealth and the negative impacts for African Americans. And we also know some of this is very intentional, where highway overpasses have been built to be low, specifically to keep out buses, so that we keep certain people in certain neighborhoods or keep other people out, right? So the way that we design the world have a huge impact. And I also want to put out there that, do you make decisions in your life? If you do, which I hope every one of us does, whether professionally or personally, we are all designers, right? Whether you design how you are creating a kitchen, to how you are creating a way of working in the workplace, to how you're creating policies in the world. Those are all acts of creation of design. So we have the power to make change through design. And there are pitfalls that we see around design that can then create to exclusion. So some of the ABCs here. A being that, you know, we are really often looking at really addressing the target group here, right? Those that of the majority. It makes a lot of sense. We want to get at that the most people, but that means we leave out many others. B is really about kind of getting the most money, right? Most bang for your buck when it comes to looking at the bottom line because it adds more value. But I would then also challenge what else adds value to life in addition to, right, the bottom line. And then finally, regarding our complacency, essentially, that we often get to a place where we think about, well, we probably can't make everyone happy, so then we get stuck in this loop of the status quo and not necessarily challenging when we should or when we can. And so really, I want to share that we then need to really look at the extremes. It's a both and, right? Focus on your target and focus on those on the edges, those on the extremes, those who are the outliers, because it will help everybody. Now, I do also want to emphasize that the concept of the statistical average is a great concept, but it's a mathematical equation. In the everyday life, it really doesn't count for much. What do I mean by that? If we look at, say, average height, the average height of the biological male in the world is 171 centimeters. Well, that doesn't mean every guy out there is 171 centimeters, right? And that was specifically the problem when we were designing cockpits in airplanes. Because at first, the design was taking the average. The seat was very much situated to be average distance from everything. And what happened from that? A lot of people died and a lot of people got injured. Can you imagine then if, you know, our cars actually had just a seat that was the average in size in the driver's seat, how dangerous that is? Well, that technology and the ability for us to change our seats came from that history, right? And how important it is for us to be able to personalize and really be able to look at the average on the edges. A little bit about inclusive design and accessibility and how we are defining it. So I'm going to start with accessibility. You'll see it's shorthanded A11Y much of the time in the world, because between the A and the Y there are 11 letters, and it also looks like the word ally, which means we want people who are active in helping the community. And accessibility is referring to how do we reduce access to services, to technologies, to products for people with disabilities, because they often face many more blockers and challenges. And then inclusive design is really looking at the bigger picture. When we're going beyond the particular population, the community of people with disabilities, and looking at all the aspects of human diversity. Now, of course, there's much more than the 6 I've listed. These really focus on those who historically and still currently, there are systematic issues around bias around the world around these particular dimensions, whether it's age, gender, socioeconomic status, but there's also many, many things we look at, right? So spirituality, with religion, with how we think, how we communicate, all of these things make up who we are. We have to look at the totality, how that interacts, how the context, what context you are in, right? Because that your experiences change. And what do I mean by that? I like to always give this one example about the fact that these days, if you take a blind customer or blind person, for example, they actually get by the world mostly with their smartphone. And that's therefore their smartphone is so important, but depending on context, if you're in the North Pole versus the equator, the battery will drain a lot faster in the North Pole. And so you have an entirely different experience. Now, if you put another aspect of dimension of intersectionality in there, a blind person who also is in low economic status, then you go to a place where every minute of their cell phone charge and all of that really counts. And think about a time where you really needed your phone to stay charged and how stressful that can be when this person's life really depends on it, right? The way we design an experience really has to consider all those aspects of inclusion, of sustainability, of all the different contexts that are out there. So we have to be very intentional in reducing bias. Now, from a technology perspective, I know we often think of technology as being bias-free, but that is just not the case, right? Because humans, we build technology, we all have biases, it is only human, and so that technology also takes on these biases. So some examples I like to give, we design the world mostly for right-handed people. Right, and that actually creates a lot of havoc for lefties, both in hardware and in software, because how we reach our apps easily by our thumbs is usually calculated the distance when it comes to the right-handed people. Simple things like facial recognition, we've known and seen how that influences technology, because it was built in Silicon Valley by mostly younger white males that tested the technology on each other, and when it went to the public, it was 99% effective until we realized that for other populations, not so much, especially looking at the intersection of race and gender, because for Black or African American females that were then later testing this technology, it was 32% less effective. It was also about 20% less effective for people with smaller eyes, right? So all of these factors come into play around how you're testing, how you're building. We also see all kinds of technology that is trying to reduce bias with algorithms, especially when we're talking about recruiting and selecting talent. But unfortunately, because algorithms can be a black box, a lot of this stuff has come out to actually create more bias. So we have to understand, what are those algorithms doing? What data is being fed into them? And similarly, nudging happens, right? We all get ads all the time, and they take our information, and we see all the time people of low socioeconomic status are nudged to purchase things like loans and credit cards that they are more likely to default on or have higher interest. So these are dark patterns, folks. How do we bring light to them in a way that could that would create more transparency, that would allow us to create more inclusion? And what does inclusion look like? These are all inclusive solutions that were originally created for people with disabilities that are now used by everyone. And I use some of these old school pictures because the long history of the technology. So we use our keyboards all the time now, but originally created for people with disabilities. For communication, the phone was inspired by Alexander Graham Bell's long time dedication to the deaf community, actually. And all of these technologies come into play now that we just take it for granted. We don't even notice them anymore. But they were created for a small segment of the world that now is enjoyed by everyone. And the message to that really is about inclusion is a win-win. And that comes to the idea of the curb effect. When we created curb cuts on the sidewalks, it was meant for people with wheelchairs, but in reality, the solution was then helpful for everyone that's on wheels or everyone pushing something with wheels. And there's a digital curb effect as well. One example is the idea of, like, if you go into whatever digital systems, does that system allow you to use a preferred name or a chosen name that's different than your legal name? Because for a lot of people, that does matter. One for trans people and non-binary people who may want to have a chosen name. For others, it is about their nickname that they want to be able to use, or they're coming from a country like China where they have an English name and a Chinese name, right? It's giving people that kind of flexibility, adaptability. Similarly, if we're talking about looking at closed captioning of subtitles, that helps, of course. It was meant to help people who are in the deaf community, but now for every one of us, if you're having an ear affection, or if you're on the train in the quiet area and you forgot your headphones, you have a solution of being able to view a video without sound, right? So again, inclusion is a win-win. A little bit about the context of what we're doing here. Inclusive design accessibility is integrated into our company's digital strategy, so it is of high priority and importance, very much aligned with our values, because what we're really trying to achieve and aspire towards is this concept of human-centric technology. How do we use technology for the good of humanity and our world? And that's why we really want to make sure this is deeply embedded. We launched the Inclusive Design, Equity, and Accessibility Strategy this January. I will share a video. Can you play that, please? Click again. Yeah.
For me, it's like, why don't companies have this, right? We're building the digital experience design team here at Incl from scratch. And it was a perfect opportunity to take a look at what the traditional gaps are in the industry and build something better. We have a moral and ethical responsibility to deliver digital experiences that work for more of the many people.
The purpose of the IDEA COE is to ensure that we are creating digital experiences that meet the needs of all of our diverse customers and coworkers.
Our purpose is really to align our digital services and products with our values.
People are working for inclusion, equality, sustainability, all these values that make the company in a class of its own. With our set of tools, we want to make sure that accessibility is something that's taken care of. Reading disabilities, color, contrast, size, all of those things are practical ways that we can make sure that people are included.
Digital inclusion means that when you design the tools, you need to consider different educational background, different physical ability. We have a lot of opportunity to provide a better life to many people because their reality can be very different from what we imagine from our day-to-day life.
The Chosen Name program allows coworkers who have a different name than their legal name to use their chosen name on the computer systems and makes it easier for you to be recognized as who you are.
That brings debate and might bring uncomfortable dialogue sometimes, but the dynamics in the meetings are so much better because of that diversity.
If we want to do something and really push something through, we come together in a room or virtual as a cross-functional team from different age, different competences, and then we make things happen.
We need to be very careful about what we feed into the algorithm, and it is our responsibility to be sure that data are diverse enough and inclusive enough.
If we're not asking the questions related to those diversity aspects, then we will just get the answers that we're looking for from our own biases.
This is everybody's responsibility. Everyone at every level of this company, in every role, needs to commit to this and move forward.
A few years down the road, the concept of digital accessibility becomes deeply embedded into every product and platform so that it becomes second nature to us.
We need to take really drastic steps.
Do we really need people dedicated to this? Yes, we do. Otherwise, change would have happened already.
Really, the story around inclusion is that it is absolutely a win-win for everyone.
Digital inclusion is key to live up to the mission of IKEA. We are for everyone. We need to be inclusive and we need to be able to be usable in a simple way for everyone around the globe.
Never gets easy watching yourself. I don't know how actors can do it. The cringe factor just every time. So a little bit about our strategy, what I called the C cubed. But essentially from all of this, really we are addressing internally first with our coworkers and customers. And then when we are ready, we really want to bring it out into the world in terms of sharing our successes, our challenges, creating think tanks. But first, we really want to establish that foundation of accessibility, ensuring we are training all of our designers, also collaborating with our developers through all of this. We really want to be able to establish all of this with evidence and quantitative and qualitative approaches so that we get the numbers and we get the richness of the stories behind it, right? Bringing all of that together. And we want to be able to create diverse and inclusive teams. So being able to create programs where we can develop people within the community, especially for the community of people with disabilities who have historically been left out of the design field. How do we change that? By creating opportunities. So what does all of that mean in terms of tangible things that we are doing? Here are a couple of things. First, we have a design system that's been built and it has accessibility integrated into it. So then we are also testing regularly with our customers with disabilities, moving now towards doing some of that test with our coworkers as well. Doing larger scale audits throughout our different countries and finding those problems within so that we can then resolve those problems, create remediation plans. We have a learning series going on both for inspiration but also more tangible things, and we're rolling out different modules that are more specifically catered to whether it's for designers or developers around the different needs, different things that they would need to do for accessibility, for inclusive design. We've been doing a play initiative for children, and we're involved in providing them some of that feedback and ideas of how do we make play also more inclusive, both from a digital and a physical perspective, so that children of all kind of backgrounds can have fun and enjoy themselves. And as you've seen, the chosen names work is being slowly but surely spread out. Something so simple is actually so complicated in the back end and all the hundreds of systems that are connected. So really, we have to make so much effort to make sure we are intentionally creating more good, right, with the technology that we have. So with that, I just want to say again, we have the power to create this world together. Every one of you make decisions, and every one of those decisions can include or exclude somebody. And so let's be intentional, and we build a more inclusive world together. Thanks very much, everybody.
I'm hoping that the presentation will change. I can see a mouse. Cool. Hi. Yeah, Robin Whittleton. I just shout at people about accessibility at IKEA. I don't have any formal position, but I tend to get dragged into stuff like this. I'm going to talk to you about some of the projects that I've been working with, trying to help impress upon the teams the desire for accessibility. I think it's really important. I'm not going to talk about kind of the basic accessibility stuff because we mostly know about that, but I will give a really quick accessibility refresh just in case anyone here is not completely familiar with that. So this is my favorite diagram ever for accessibility, and it talks really about the four kind of core principles behind accessibility. So first off, if you think about the system on the right, how do people perceive the information that system is portraying? So how can they get the information out of the system into their head? And then we have understandability, which is how can you then make choices based on that information you've got? And then finally, operate. So how can you take those choices you've made and push them back into the system? And that's that cycle that we all go through over and over again whenever we're using a system. But there can be accessibility problems at any of those stages. The fourth point in the middle, robustness, is can your system interface with assistive technologies? Is it built in a standardized way? And that's maybe where some of the problems I'm going to talk about come from. And as another quick refresher, this is a slide from Microsoft's Inclusive Designs documentation. And just think about it as widening your concept of what disability is. So typically when we think about disability, we'll think about permanent disabilities, this disability on the left, the one arm scenario. But a temporary disability where your arm is in this thing for a month or 2 months, that's also a disability. You're disabled from being able to use that arm. And then finally, the new parent example where you've held your child, you've got them to sleep, and then you don't want to move your arm in case they wake up. So that's a situational disability. It's a disability that you could change at any time, but you've got reasons why you want to keep that in place. And we need to think about the wider group rather than the smaller group when we're designing for accessibility in mind. And one final point on this very quick intro. I like this concept. It's not accepted by everyone, but I like it. The concept is that people don't have disabilities. They are disabled by society being able to not cater for their particular needs. I think that's a really powerful thing because it flips this concept of disability away from the person who has done nothing specific to find themselves in that situation and puts the onus on us to make sure that we're meeting everyone's needs. That's maybe a little bit contentious to say that we've won already, but I think that for general web stuff, we kind of know what we're doing at this point. Maybe 10 years ago or 5 years ago, we didn't really, but I think there's an interest among designers and developers for accessibility now. We kind of got to grips with a lot of the tools and techniques we need to use to be accessible. And as well as that, we've got a legal situation that requires accessibility, maybe not specifically in Sweden at the moment, outside of the public sector, but IKEA is a global company. And so we need to look at every market that we deal with to be able to look at what our baseline has to be. And so at the top there, we've got the Wcag, this is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. We have markets in both Canada and we supply a website to IKEA Israel as well. And they both have Wcag 2.0 written into their law. So that immediately gives us that lower bound for what we need to do. ADA compliance in the US, that's tied to Wcag now. And in the EU in 2025, I was going to say all private sector, but then someone corrected me a few weeks ago. It's actually some private sector, but still IKEA definitely falls into that as we run an e-commerce site. So in June 2025, we will legally have to be 2.1 AA compliant. And so it's one of our engineering baselines. Most of you will know Ingvar. He's Ingvar Kamprad, the IK from IKEA. And he, in the 70s, decided to write down a bit of a vision statement for IKEA. And his vision was to create a better everyday life for the many people. And this is one of those core phrases you see at IKEA a lot. But we can think about accessibility in terms of this. And the many people here is everyone. It doesn't matter if you've got a particular set of needs, we should be building stuff for you, or providing stuff for you. But that doesn't mean that we're doing it all perfectly at the moment. And as Ingvar also said, most things still remain to be done. And so we've got a lot of work to do. But that doesn't mean that we can't be excited and do that work in a positive way. So I'm going to bring up a couple of quick examples to talk you through some of the more complex stuff we're doing at the moment and the things that we're thinking about. We haven't solved all of these problems, but they're interesting problems to think about. So first up, we've talked about text and forms, and this is kind of a solved problem at this point. It's IKEA Sweden homepage, and it's broadly accessible. Yeah, there are always things we can make better, but in practice, we do a lot of reviews of this. We make sure that we put a lot of work into making this accessible, and I think we do a pretty good job. But you can't accomplish every possible interface using just text and forms. Sometimes you need to be a bit more creative. This is one of our sofa planners. I wouldn't recommend that sofa, but it's quite fun to build it. We build these planners. We've got a wide range of planners, and they plan kitchens. They plan the PAX planner here, and you know they do have some web content on them, and they've got, you know, as Ty mentioned, we've got accessible design systems we can use to build that, but they also have 3D scenes, and those 3D scenes live in the context of a standard web page. So you can see here this PAX planner. We've got the web content down the right-hand side, and then we've got the 3D scene on the left. And web content, that's a kind of solved problem. We know that we want nice, big, chunky focus outlines. We want alt text. We want standardized tab orders. We want everything that would come from a modern web presentation. But then we get over to the left-hand side, this 3D scene, and we say, well, how do we make that accessible? That's not really a solved problem in the same way. So let's focus in on a particular set of users. So if we talk about keyboard users, and by keyboard users, I'm including people who use switch control as well. Not quite the same technology, but it's broadly similar. If you're not familiar, switch technology would be if you're in a wheelchair and you have a switch to either side of your head, or if you have a sip puff control, a tube that you can suck air into or blow out, and that can register as two different actions. So how do we move the item selection to the scene? So let's say you've picked one of these drawers. Do we then want to focus that drawer in the scene and start allowing people to manipulate that directly? Or is that change of context confusing? And then once we're in the scene, how do we get back to the selection panel on the right-hand side? And then should we use the arrow keys here on the keyboard? And it's easy enough to bind the arrow keys, but what should the behavior be? Should the arrow keys manipulate the camera maybe? Or should the arrow keys manipulate the object you've selected? Should the camera maybe just track automatically the object you selected as you're manipulating it? If you're tabbing through the items, so you're using the tab key to just select the next item in the scene, which we can do, what order do they turn up in? Should they turn up in left to right, or right to left in our international Arabic and Israeli markets? Or should you tab through them in the order you added them? If they're left to right, and the camera is automatically changing to point at that item, then does that change the left to right ordering of the items in the scene? There's really complex interaction questions here. And so maybe we can fall back on pre-learned behaviors. And I put WASD up there. If you're a PC gamer, you'll be vaguely familiar with those keys. 3D games are a really interesting subject because they're a 3D environment that people already know how to use. There are standards of familiar patterns that people can fall back on as to what they expect to happen in that system. And there's a really good website called Game Accessibility Guidelines that I recommend people checking out if you're interested. A lot of those rules can apply directly to our 3D planners. The one about having the option to turn off blood and guts if you're a PTSD sufferer, wouldn't recommend that for IKEA products. But it is a useful website that we can pull some information from. But let's have a look at another set of users. What about visually impaired users? So it turns out, if I jump back to this thing, it turns out that there's some data behind this scene. So there's something called a scene graph, and we use the scene graph to then render the scene into the web page. The scene graph is just a set of data about what's on that, what's in the scene. So, you know, there are 5 PAX planners. Well, that's just going to be some data in an object. And it turns out we can quite easily, as engineers, take that information from the scene graph, run it through a map function, convert it to a string of text, and have that string of text read out to a screen reader. And that's fine. We can do that. It's not difficult. We prototyped it. It took a day. But what's the expectation? There we go. What's the expectation? What does a user want to know? So every time we make a change to the scene, we just read out the entire scene again. That's going to be an awful experience. So maybe we need to work out some sort of system that can propose changes. But do we want to read out every change you do every time you make a change, or do we just want to read out a confirmatory message that the change has happened? How chatty should the system be? And you know, maybe there are things like if you want to add something to the screen, then do we want to tell the user about the gaps and not the things that are in the system? And that makes it not impossible, but you know, that's not impossible from an engineering point of view, but engineers will not build things without design. And so we need to know what the design of the system looks like. And so, yeah, they're all design problems at the base of it. You know, we can't fix things unless we know what the expected behavior should be. Or another way of putting it, we need to think about this from the very start. And that means that we need to get content designers and we need to get interaction designers involved right from the very start of these products. It's really easy for an engineer to just build a 3D engine and then add some specular highlighting. Wow, I've done mirrored doors. Brilliant. And yeah, sure, it looks nice. But without that design thinking behind it, it doesn't actually solve any problems. And designers, unfortunately, historically have been somewhat unaware of accessibility issues and have typically mostly focused on what it looks like rather than what it does or what the solution is trying to solve is. So we need to all get better at making sure that we consider accessibility right from the very start. Let's move on to another example. So this is a system that's just about still in beta, but we're working on getting this live shortly. And it's the Design Your Home. So this is, again, a 3D scene, although in this case it's actually just a photo background, which we then import IKEA furniture into. You can see that you can move the furniture around. You can manipulate that furniture. And you can drop that furniture into place wherever you want. And the idea behind this isn't so much a planner. So it's not, you're not trying to, I mean, with the planners that we talked about earlier, you're really, for example, measuring your room and trying to make sure that things will fit in it. Here we're just inserting IKEA products into a photo and making sure that, or, trying to get inspired by this. Is this a room you'd like to live in as a bedroom? And we can go a bit further. This is a pre-made background, but we can also, and in fact we do, have a mobile app where you can take a few photos of your room and it builds it into a 3D model, so it knows where the edges of the room are, it knows where you can position furniture in it. We can then upload it and you can start putting IKEA furniture into your room. And again, we can go a step further than that. So let's say you've got a cupboard that you want to replace in the corner of your room. You don't want to have to move that cupboard out of the way so that you can take a photo of your room to see if a IKEA cupboard would fit in nicely there. So we can use a bit of machine learning to actually delete that cupboard in real time. We work out what the color of your wallpapers are, we work out where the edges of your room are, and then we just delete the item. It's really quite an impressive solution. So this is what it looks like. And again, it looks very much like the previous planner. We've got some web content and we've got a scene that you're going to insert some stuff into. In this case, this scene is a photo, or at least a render. So there's no 3D camera, which makes things a lot easier. And for keyboard users, we can move around between the panels. We've got skip links, so you can jump between panels. And we're investigating area grid roles. It's another technology that allows you to move between different parts of a grid layout. That's pretty useful. And yep, we can also tab through scenes with the proviso, again, of which order do we do stuff, but that's something that we can resolve with prototyping, careful choices. You can select items, you can manipulate them. Keyboard users, we're good. Users with mobility problems, we're less good. When we want to capture a room, we then suddenly have problems. So I've taken a quick video of the guidance here, and we've been working on this for about 3 years, so this guidance is somewhat old now, so it's done a little bit earlier, and I think it's due an update. But in the spirit of full openness, we can say that we recognize our problems. But yeah, you can see here, the guidance has an able-bodied person in it. And it's requiring you to do specific actions with your body. So, pivot the phone, okay? Now hold still. That's not immediately obvious. It's easy for everyone to hold still for the amount of time it takes to capture. It says to back up. Well, what if walking backwards is difficult, or if you're in a wheelchair? Even the actual physical act of capturing this thing is difficult. And it also, at one point it says to keep your elbows close to your body. So all of these things, they're not wrong per se for an able-bodied person, but we can be more inclusive in our content and our messaging, how we can get more information to people that won't necessarily fit the model that this system assumes you fit into. And then finally, visually impaired users, and this is where it gets kind of tricky. So the point of this system is to basically build a picture postcard of your perfect room. And the point of that is to inspire you, and because we're a business, then the point of being inspired is you go into IKEA and you buy all of the products you put in your room. So then we say, well, okay, a picture postcard, what does that mean for our visually impaired users? What does it mean for blind users? And then we hit a problem. Because while we can do some interesting stuff around alt text or alternative readouts, we could recognize that the wallpaper is green, and we could say that there is a green room. We know what information, what products you've put into that room. So we can say, well, we've added a chair, so we can get data about that chair from a database and say in the room is a Poang and a Billy bookcase. It's easy enough. But what does it mean? Like the point of the system is to inspire people. So how are we going to inspire a visually impaired user with there is a room, in the room is a chair? It's like a text adventure, it doesn't work. So we need to take a bit of a step back with this system. Doesn't mean we can't ship a version 1, but when we ship version 2, we need to consider what the concept of design your home means for visually impaired users. Absolutely, we've got more work to do. We will do it. We've got this good thinking going in the organization now, so I have no expectation that we won't do this, but we do need to put more thought into this. Okay, so really quickly, some of the other stuff that's going on, possibilities we could do at IKEA. I really like our fraud-free stuff. I wasn't a convert until I installed some automated blinds and realized just how easy it makes things. But we all walk around with, as Ty said, supercomputers in our pocket, and those all have voice interaction built in. And so if you imagine that you're a wheelchair user, for example, you want to raise historically a blind, trying to reach up to get hold of the cable, or in fact, we don't even do cable blinds anymore. Twist blinds, having to reach up to do that. Maybe it's difficult to get around your bed to do that, whereas now you can just say, hey, company's voice activation of choice, can you raise the blinds, and up they go. It's really amazing. And, we could absolutely, and I'm sure we will, continue doing this. So we do a range of ovens. Wouldn't it be cool if you could say, hey, set the oven to 225? And then that stops you from, especially for, say, a blind or visually impaired user, and you're trying to squint at the tiny little numbers around the dial or some of those touch-sensitive things that make no sense. Now you can actually actively set this, and so that's a super freeing thing. This concept of binding physical and digital together to open up accessibility opportunities, for me, is a really important thing. How about our assembly instructions? I mean, most people these days are just using this with whatever paper comes in their package. But wouldn't it be cool if we could do something like narration? Why couldn't we have an app that narrates each of our assembly instructions through as you're going through and explains in detail what you're trying to do? Or why don't we animate this, instead of having these little spinny arrows around screwdrivers, why don't we just animate the screw going in and which direction it's going? This isn't far-fetched. This is all normal technology. Yeah, sure, it would be a chunk of work, but we've had these things for 40, 50 years. So why is it not time to change this? And again, with AR, everyone's talking about AR, and it's kind of the technology of the moment. This is a screenshot of IKEA Places, which was a quick demo we hacked together a few years ago when Apple launched ARKit. And we didn't really do very much with this, but that doesn't mean we can't do more AR stuff in the future. And we've got a really good set of possibilities for it. For example, in-store navigation. At the moment, we have arrows on the floor that are lit. Why couldn't we, for example, have AR that provided you with different colored arrows for your particular path you need to take? We can even tell you about the shortcuts and stuff. And what about allergy information, for example, in the restaurants? All it would take is for you to add which things you're allergic to your login profile, and then we know what our food has in the way of allergens. We know where our food is on the shelves. If you can hold up an AR thing, it can just put a big cross over the things you can't eat. I mean, that would be amazing. But obviously, there are also problems with AR. Typical calibration for AR at the moment is hold your phone and then do a figure of 8 motion in a very graceful way. It doesn't work for a whole chunk of our population. You can't do that, especially if you're in a wheelchair and you've got your iPad fixed to your wheelchair. How are you going to calibrate it in that sense? So maybe we're limited to a certain extent by the technology. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try and solve those problems where we can, but it does mean that we have to be careful about who it is we're targeting and what we're doing. So any good conference talk needs to end with a challenge. This is my challenge to you. So please start your design process thinking about users. Don't think about solutions, don't think about technologies, think about users. What problems are you trying to solve? And then as with Ty's presentation where we had the sort of bell chart where you've got people off on the sides, it's those people off on the sides that are interesting. Before I came to IKEA, I worked for gov.uk, and we always in user research tried to bring in people that didn't have confidence in using computers, because we got more interesting information out of them. There's no point in putting your system, if you're wondering whether it's usable, putting it in front of people that know how to use computers inside out. That doesn't work at all. It doesn't give you any information. So test it on people that will have potentially more difficulty using your system and see how you can improve it. Preferably, get people who have specific needs, not just in for prototyping, but get them into your team if you can. There's nothing like lived experience of someone in your team not being able to use the app they're trying to build to really hone that concentration on fixing problems. And then finally, just enjoy this process. It's not a checklist. It's not something that you do because you're legally obliged to, although that is a reason why you do it. But do it because it's fun and it engages people and it gets your app or your system out to more users. And what's the point in building anything if no one's going to use it? You might as well just go for more people using it. So, yep. Thank you very much. We had some time, we've got about 10 minutes left for questions if anyone's got any. There aren't a huge amount of people here, so maybe there are no questions, but if anyone does, I'm happy to answer, and Ty as well. Yeah, I can.
Thank you. A lot of professionals like architects and interior designers are using the 2D because it's easy to fit in a specific place, and you can easily have more the vision of the possibilities that you have. And also you will always refer to it in a very logical way, but we're just dumping in and saying that the 3D planner is the best way to kind of like, I understand like, no, not everybody's an engineer, but it seems like I was at least missing like that one, okay, where do I get the logic? Because it will also be, if you are visually impaired, easier to understand, okay, this is the first part, this is the second part, this is
there are a whole bunch of different planners built by IKEA. And some of them are for more expensive products than others. So if you're building a sofa, well, the main thing is getting inspired by that sofa and seeing the dimensions, because you can just go and measure your room. It's not, you don't need to be centimeter accurate unless you've got a very tight room. On the other hand, I've just going through the process of putting a new kitchen in, and as I'm get a staff discount, I've gone with IKEA. I'm not ashamed to admit it. So we've been using the 3D kitchen planner. And what happens is once you've set up your room and you're meant to measure everything and really be very careful and insert everything into the room as you expect, then it converts it into a set of 2D plans. And those 2D plans are being used by my installation company to put the kitchen in. So, and you can switch between that at any point during the installation. Now, I'd be the first person to admit that we've probably got some accessibility problems with our kitchen planner. But that doesn't mean that it's not a suitable base for development on. So, yeah. Anyone else? Oh, sorry, Chris, did that answer your question? Okay, cool.
In your research, have you noticed that there are, or have you, documented if there are cultural differences in the way people experience web design? And if so, how do you design around that, or specific groups?
That's maybe more one for Ty.
Great question. I mean, we definitely want to look into, experiences of culture, of all kinds of differences. And that's where we really want to engage our coworkers. So right now we have created agreements with our coworker resource groups, or standard employee resource groups, so that we can start testing with them, start co-designing with them, right? Because every country, every culture, every place has differences, right? So in order for us to adapt, we need to be able to go to the source of it.
There's maybe a second point on that, which is that IKEA is seen as a sort of quintessentially Swedish brand. And so while, yes, absolutely, we need to adapt to particular environments, if we completely adapted, we'd lose some of our identity as being IKEA. So there's a delicate balancing act between being IKEA and being super inclusive. I don't know if you have any extra thoughts on that, Tai?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we do have to kind of find that balance, which is an ongoing dialogue and quite dynamic, both with our customers and our coworkers, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a student and I'm studying digital design and all that. And in school, they've already mentioned and started emphasizing how important it is with inclusive design. But I don't know where to start because I don't know very much, because I've just started learning about accessibility. Do you both have any tips or starting points or what we should think about, especially when we're first now starting to prototype websites that could be used by actual, like, for example, teams or whatever?
I think that's amazing that you're studying and you're already being exposed to this, right? Because it is still a fairly new field. For me, I always tell everyone, look, I think in your everyday life, start trying to look for points where you are interacting with experiences that just don't quite work for you or your loved ones. And you really start experiencing that all over the place. Simple things like those pictures that I snapped, right, as I was going about in Amsterdam. And where do things work? When I was living in Sweden, the supermarkets have frozen food, like the freezers, they're so high up. Like, I'm a very small person. I could barely reach in, and sometimes I feel like I'm gonna fall in. And if it's somebody in a wheelchair, forget it, right? So those simple little things, once you start experiencing the exclusion, then you want to start, challenging that and designing around it. So it's a matter of like building your mind to think about, who are we leaving out in this, in that, and this, right? Because I guarantee there's no such thing as a product that's going to work for everyone. It's impossible, right? So everything includes some people, excludes some others. So just being aware and being curious.
I'd say, as well as on that, you're already designing for multiple audiences. So I'm assuming that when you design a website that you're designing mobile first, because I'm assuming that's what you've been taught to do. And then that means afterwards you're adding some desktop views. So you're already thinking, what's the difference between a mobile user and a desktop user? Well, if you start learning about some of the specific needs that people have when they come to your site, then you'll just start including those in your thought process, your design process. So one of the really common things is, or a common disability that's maybe a little bit more invisible is, I think something like 8% or 12% of Caucasian men have red-green color blindness. So, and then typically we would look at a site and put like red for out of stock and the green for in stock. And that is an immediate and obvious disability that once you've learned about it, you will see all over the place. So if you start learning about the various needs that people have, then you will start learning, then you will start thinking more about how you can solve those needs as part of your design process. Yeah. Sorry. We've got 2 minutes left if anyone else has got anything. Otherwise.
I just want to build on the last question. That was really good. Who is best in class? Because we're talking about now going out and find out what not is working, but actually seeing what is working can also be a great inspiration.
Yeah. It's a good question, and I don't know the answer. I mean, there are plenty of organizations that go for accessibility over visual design. So they will do something that is, you know, almost, I hate to say it, but almost ugly in the pursuit of building the perfectly accessible solution. And that, while it works for accessibility, it doesn't necessarily work from a best-in-class point of view, because we also want to be attractive and we want to be inspirational and we want to have all of the other things that make up not just IKEA but a high-quality website. So who's doing a super accessible system and also you know, working for everyone? I'm not sure. I don't have a very good answer for that, I'm afraid.
The Target has done quite a bit of work as far as retailers go, right?
Yeah.
But definitely, right, big tech companies for sure, since it's their bread and butter. But that's where, yeah, we all want to challenge ourselves to do more, because when it comes to accessibility, right, or inclusion for that matter, it's just a continuous process, right? That there is nothing that will just signal that this will be done. Even if we're talking about accessibility and the standards, you can, you know, theoretically check all the boxes in the legal standards, but those things will change and your technology will change. So it's always about how can you make that better. So, you know, looking at the companies that will say, like, we are on this journey and we will continue to be on that journey. But I think many of us, the reality is that we can do better.
And even for those companies that have ticked all the boxes, you know, that doesn't stop you from having design-level accessibility problems. You know, you can always design a more accessible solution, even if you have ticked the engineering challenges. So, yeah. Cool. I think we're out of time. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, everyone.
We're going to be, just before we start, want to say that this is going to be filmed and live streamed. So in case you're very sensitive about having your image on camera, please move out of the range of filming. We are not going to be doing audience reaction shots or gotcha shots or any kind of close-ups, but just having that in mind, it might be inform you where you want to sit. So